My name is Emily Carter. I'm 35 years old, a marketing consultant from Chicago, and I'd like to start this story by asking, where are you watching from? Whether you're sitting on your couch in Toronto, driving through the busy streets of New York, or sipping coffee somewhere quiet in Vancouver, I wanted to sit tight because what you're about to hear still feels like a movie I haven't woken up from. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day where nothing seems wrong, yet everything is about to change. I was in another state, Dallas, Texas, visiting a client who had just signed a big contract with our firm. I remember feeling proud, relieved even. It had taken months of hard work and long calls to land this deal. My husband, Ryan, had always complained that I was married to my job, so I thought, maybe this success will make him proud for once. But that afternoon, everything in my world cracked open with one phone call. My phone buzzed on the conference table just as my client, Mr. Reynolds, was explaining his company's new product launch. I smiled politely and excused myself, thinking it was probably Ryan checking if my flight was on time. When I answered, I could hear laughter in the background, music, a woman's voice, the sound of glasses clinking. "Ryan?" I asked softly, stepping into the hallway. He laughed again, that smug kind of laugh that instantly made my stomach twist. "Hey, he said. "Just thought I should call and let you know. I'm divorcing you." At first, I thought he was joking. We'd had arguments, sure. But divorce? Out of nowhere? What? I whispered, my throat tightening. "I've already sold our apartment," he continued, his tone cold and deliberate. "Got a great offer, too. Don't worry, I'll leave you the couch or something. I'm starting my new life, with my new girlfriend." He chuckled again. "Enjoy looking for a new place." There was clapping in the background, like someone had just made a toast. And then he said, "You were always too busy to notice me anyway, Emily. Maybe now you'll learn to prioritize what matters." I remember staring at the wall, my heart pounding in my ears. But I didn't let my voice shake. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply said, "Sounds good, Ryan." There was silence for a few seconds, like he was waiting for me to explode. But I didn't give him that satisfaction. I ended the call, took a deep breath, and walked back into the meeting like nothing had happened. No one could tell that my marriage had just ended between two polite handshakes. That night, I sat in my hotel room, looking out at the Dallas skyline. My wedding ring sparkled under the lamp. I thought about the last 10 years of my life, how I'd worked 2 jobs when we were first married to support his dream of opening a gym, how I'd skipped vacations to pay our bills when he was struggling, how I had always believed love meant loyalty, even when things got hard. And yet, here I was alone, humiliated, and displaced. But even through the sting of betrayal, something in me refused to break. Because you see, I've always believed that kindness and strength are not weaknesses. They are choices. Life tests you not to show your limits, but to reveal your courage. So I wiped my tears, packed my things, and flew back home to Chicago the next morning. But when I got there, oh, you should have seen his face. Ryan was standing in the living room, grinning ear to ear, like a man who had won some twisted game. His arm was around a younger woman with bleach blonde hair, wearing one of my sweaters. Boxes were stacked near the door, and I instantly noticed something. The apartment looked too empty. Most of the furniture was gone. He gave me that smirk I used to hate. "Didn't expect you back so soon," he said. "Guess you'll need to start packing, too." I smiled faintly. Not because I was okay, but because in that moment I realized something he didn't. The apartment wasn't his to sell. I had bought it with my bonus 2 years ago, in my name only. He'd forgotten that part because he'd been too busy showing off on social media and pretending he was the breadwinner. I stood quietly for a moment, then said in a calm voice, "Ryan, you might want to sit down." He laughed. "Why? You gonna cry now? Or beg me to stay?" I just kept that same neutral tone. "No," I said. "But you'll want to hear this before you embarrass yourself any further." His grin faltered just slightly, but before I could finish, something else caught my eye, an envelope on the counter, with my name scribbled across it in his handwriting. I reached for it slowly, feeling my chest tighten. Inside were my mother's pearl earrings, the ones I'd been searching for last month, the ones he'd claimed he hadn't seen. That was the moment my calm started to crack, not with fear, but with anger. Not only had he betrayed me, but he'd done it with someone who is now living in my home, wearing my clothes, surrounded by my things. But I didn't say a word yet. I placed the earrings in my pocket, looked at him, and smiled. "Ryan," I said softly, "I hope your new girlfriend likes surprises." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I just walked to the bedroom, closed the door, and opened my laptop. Because what he didn't know, what would soon wipe that smug grin right off his face, was that I had been keeping records of every bill, every transfer, every loan he'd taken using my credit. And as I typed that night, listening to their laughter fade into nervous whispers, I knew this was far from over. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's preparation. And when I walked out of that room the next morning, his smile quickly disappeared when I walked out of the bedroom that next morning calm, dressed neatly in a soft blue blouse and black pants, my laptop bag over my shoulder. The smell of coffee filled the apartment. He had made it, probably trying to play the role of a happy man in front of his new girlfriend. Ryan looked up from the kitchen counter with that same smirk plastered on his face. The blonde woman, who I would later learn was named Tiffany, sat on one of the stools sipping from my favorite mug, the one with the gold knee on it. She wore my silk robe, my wedding robe, and my blood boiled for half a second. But I didn't let it show. "Morning," I said simply, my voice neutral as if nothing had happened. Ryan chuckled. "Morning? You mean moving day, right?" He turned to Tiffany. "See, babe, she's chill. I told you she's too career-obsessed to care." Tiffany giggled, tossing her hair. "Oh, don't be mean," she said, though her tone had that fake sweetness that grated on my nerves. I placed my coffee cup on the counter and looked around the apartment. Empty shelves. Missing frames. The couch was gone. So were the dining chairs. He had actually done it, sold off the furniture, piece by piece. I looked him dead in the eye. "You said you sold the apartment, right?" He grinned. "Yup. Closed the deal 2 days ago. The buyer's a friend of mine. We got a great price, too." I nodded slowly, pretending to process that. "Did you, by any chance, check the title deed before you did that?" His grin faltered. "What?" I took a sip of coffee, enjoying his confusion. "You said you sold it. But Ryan, honey, that apartment isn't under your name. It's mine. Bought it 2 years ago. Cash." Tiffany looked between us, blinking rapidly. "Wait, what?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "That's not possible. My name was on everything." "Oh, it was," I said sweetly, "until I refinanced it. You were at your brother's bachelor party that weekend, remember?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice through the air. Tiffany stood up, the robe shifting awkwardly on her shoulders. Ryan's face flushed red. You tricked me," he stammered. I smiled politely. "No, Ryan. You just never paid attention." I picked up my bag and moved toward the door, pausing briefly. "Oh, by the way," I added, glancing at Tiffany, "you have about an hour to get out before I call security. The building doesn't allow unauthorized tenants." Tiffany frowned. "But Ryan said—" "Ryan says a lot of things," I interrupted gently. "You'll learn." Then I turned and walked out the door, my heels clicking confidently against the hallway floor. The elevator ride down felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I had work to do, quiet, careful work. When I reached the street, the morning sun hit my face, warm and bright, and I realized something important. Sometimes, walking away isn't losing. Sometimes, it's the beginning of your win. I rented a small studio near Lake Michigan that afternoon. It wasn't much, but it was mine, peaceful, simple, and silent. I needed that silence to think. I started gathering every document I had, contracts, transfers, account statements. And as I pieced them together, I found something shocking. Ryan hadn't just sold furniture. He'd forged my electronic signature on a few withdrawal slips from our joint account. He'd even taken out a small business loan under my name for his new fitness studio. My hands trembled when I saw the total, over $60,000. That's when my kindness started to harden into something else: determination. I called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Caroline who had handled a past client dispute for me. She was blunt but kind, the sort of person who could make a lion nervous just by smiling. "Emily," she said after hearing everything, "you've been married for how long?" 10 years next month, I said quietly.
She paused. "All right."
"You have two options: fight back legally or walk away clean. But if you choose to fight, you'll need to be strategic. Don't let him know you've discovered this yet." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "I won't," I said. And that's exactly what I did. For the next few days, I went about life as if nothing had happened. I even answered a few of Ryan's texts pretending to be confused about the moving situation. I needed him to stay careless. Meanwhile, Caroline and I filed the paperwork quietly. Every transaction, every forged document, every dollar he'd stolen, it all became part of a legal storm waiting to hit him. But before that could happen, something unexpected happened that tested me in a way I never saw coming. One evening, just as I was preparing to sleep, I got a call from an unknown number. "Hello." I answered cautiously. A trembling voice whispered, "Emily, it's Tiffany." I froze. "What do you want?" She sniffled. "I'm sorry to bother you. Ryan kicked me out. He said it's my fault he's in trouble. I don't know where to go." Her voice cracked, and suddenly, I remembered the fear I had once felt, the betrayal, the loneliness. As much as I wanted to hang up, I couldn't. "Where are you?" I asked softly. She gave me an address near the edge of the city, a rundown motel. I hesitated, then grabbed my coat and drove there. When I arrived, Tiffany was sitting outside, hugging her knees. Her makeup was smudged, and she looked like a lost child. "Why did you call me?" I asked. She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "Because I thought he loved me, but he used me, too." Her words hit me like a quiet echo of my own story. And for a moment I felt something strange, empathy. I sighed and handed her my spare jacket. "Get in," I said. "You can crash at my place for a night. Just one." She nodded silently, grateful. That night, we sat at my kitchen table, two women on opposite sides of the same heartbreak. She told me how Ryan had promised her everything, how he said he'd left me because I was cold, controlling, too focused on work. I smiled faintly. "Classic Ryan," I said. Tiffany's eyes widened. "You're not angry?" "Oh, I am," I replied softly. "But anger doesn't win wars. Patience does." As she fell asleep on the couch, I stared out the window, my mind already racing with the next step. Because tomorrow morning, Ryan's perfect new life was about to collapse. And it wouldn't be because I screamed or cried or begged. It would be because I stayed calm and I played smarter. When dawn broke, I packed my briefcase, slipped on my heels, and headed to the courthouse to file one last piece of paperwork. That afternoon, as Ryan swaggered into his gym's grand opening party, cameras flashing and reporters snapping photos, he had no idea that every cent in that gym account was about to be frozen. His smile wouldn't last long, because when he saw me standing in the doorway an hour later, holding the official notice in my hand, his grin started to fade. And that's when everything changed again. The look on Ryan's face when he saw me standing there, perfectly calm, perfectly composed, was priceless. The crowd around him went silent, like someone had turned off the music. He blinked twice, forcing a fake smile as he tried to figure out what I was doing at his grand opening. "Emily," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Wow, didn't expect you here. You come to wish me luck." I tilted my head slightly, pretending to consider his words. "In a way, yes," I said softly, handing him a crisp white envelope. "You'll need it." He frowned, tearing it open. The color drained from his face as his eyes scanned the document inside. It was an official court notice, bank account freeze, pending investigation for fraud and forgery. "Dubich, what is this?" he stammered, his confident tone vanishing. I smiled, my voice quiet but sharp. "That's what happens when you forge signatures, Ryan. You may have sold my furniture, but you can't sell your way out of the law. A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. His business partner, a tall man named Chris, stepped forward, reading over Ryan's shoulder. "Wait a second," Chris said, his face twisting in shock. "You used her credit to open the gym?" Ryan turned red. "It's not like that. She's lying." I stayed calm. "Oh, I'm sure. But the court will decide soon enough." Chris looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. "Ma'am, I had no idea." He threw Ryan a disgusted look. "You told me you paid for everything yourself." Ryan opened his mouth, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Don't bother, Ryan. You've done enough talking for both of us." The silence was deafening. Then the whispers started. Cameras clicked again, not out of admiration this time, but scandal. I turned to leave, but before I walked out the door, I said one last thing. "By the way, Ryan, you should probably call your bank before you go home. You might find some surprises waiting for you." And with that, I walked away, heels clicking, heart steady, every step lighter than the last. When I got into my car, I took a deep breath and finally let out a laugh. Not a mean laugh, just the kind of laugh that comes when you realize you've survived what was meant to break you. But even as I drove away, a small part of me ached. 10 years. 10 years of love, memories, sacrifices, gone in a puff of arrogance. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free, but empty. That evening, when I got home, Tiffany was still there, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea. She looked up at me nervously. "How did it go?" she asked softly. I dropped my bag and sat down beside her. "It's done. His accounts are frozen. His gym's under review. The court will handle the rest." She looked down, twisting her fingers. "I'm sorry again, Emily. I didn't know he was married when we met. He told me you'd already left him." I studied her face for a moment. She was young, maybe 24. Too young to understand how men like Ryan could twist the truth. "I believe you," I said gently. "You were caught in his web, same as I was." She looked surprised. "You're being nice to me?" I smiled faintly. "Kindness isn't weakness, Tiffany. It's strength. It means I'm not letting him change who I am." She nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. "I wish I were that strong." I reached over and patted her hand. "You will be." For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not revenge, not anger, just peace. But peace has a strange way of testing you. Because just when I thought everything was settling down, life decided to throw me another storm. It started 3 days later. I was sitting at my new desk, finalizing a proposal for a client, when I got an email from my lawyer, Caroline. The subject line read, "Urgent, call me now." My stomach dropped. I picked up the phone instantly. "Caroline?" Her voice was tense. "Emily, I just received a motion from Ryan's attorney. He's counterfiling."
What?
"On what grounds?"
She sighed.
"He's claiming emotional distress and loss of business opportunity. He says you intentionally sabotaged him out of jealousy." I nearly laughed. "Jealousy? Of what?" "His poor decisions." "I know, Emily," Caroline said calmly, "but it's not about the truth right now. It's about who can prove it. He's trying to paint you as vengeful, and if the judge believes even part of it, it could drag this case out for months." I rubbed my temples. "So, what do we do?" "Stay quiet," she said firmly. "No social media. No public comments. We'll let his own mistakes expose him." I agreed, but deep down I knew Ryan wouldn't stop easily. He was too proud, too desperate. That night, I went for a walk along Lake Michigan to clear my head. The water shimmered under the city lights, peaceful and endless. I thought about my mother's words she'd told me years ago when I was young and heartbroken over my first failed relationship. "Kindness doesn't mean letting people walk over you, Emily," she'd said. "It means staying true to your heart while standing your ground." And right then, I decided I wouldn't let Ryan twist the story. Not again. When I got home, Tiffany was in the kitchen cooking pasta. She'd started helping around the house to show her gratitude. It was strange having her there, strange but not unwelcome. Hey, she said, smiling nervously. I was thinking maybe I should testify for you. Tell the court what really happened. I hesitated. That's kind, but it could drag you into this mess. I don't care, she said firmly. He lied to both of us. If I can help you, I will. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how far she'd come in just a few days. She'd gone from a scared, crying girl to someone finding her courage again. All right, I said softly. But only if you're sure. She nodded. I am. And that's when my plan began to evolve. We started gathering everything, texts, messages, screenshots. Tiffany still had his voice notes, his promises, even receipts where he'd used my cards for his dates. Each piece became part of a quiet but powerful puzzle. But as we worked, I noticed something strange. Ryan had gone completely silent. No calls, no texts, no posts online. Until one night, at exactly 11:43 p.m., I heard a soft knock on my door. I froze. Tiffany, half asleep on the couch, looked up. Who is it? I whispered. Stay here. I walked slowly to the door and looked through the peephole. My heart skipped a beat. It was Ryan, standing there in the dark, rain dripping from his hair, eyes wild with something between anger and desperation. He knocked again, harder this time. Emily, open the door, he said, his voice low but firm. We need to talk. Every instinct in me screamed no. But I also knew Ryan. He wouldn't leave quietly. I took a deep breath, my hand hovering over the lock, and whispered to myself, Stay calm, Emily. Stay smart. Then, slowly, I turned the handle. I opened the door just a crack, enough to see Ryan's face in the dim light of the porch. His wet hair clung to his forehead, and his eyes, once confident and smug, were wild, desperate, and angry. The kind of anger that doesn't know when to stop. Emily, we need to talk, he said again, stepping closer. Rain splashed onto the welcome mat, soaking his shoes. His voice had an edge I hadn't heard in years. I rested my hand firmly on the doorframe. Talk. You mean beg, threaten, or manipulate? I asked, my tone calm. He hesitated, like he wasn't sure which would work. Then he laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant laugh. It was nervous, shaky, forced. Look, I made a mistake. Big mistake. But you can't ruin everything for me. I stared at him for a long moment. Everything? Ryan, you sold furniture that wasn't yours, forged signatures, and lied to everyone you knew. I didn't ruin anything. You did that yourself. He swallowed hard and ran a hand through his wet hair. Please, Emily, you have to understand. I didn't think. I shook my head. You never think. That's the problem. I stepped back and closed the door just enough to let the rain drip onto the porch. I'll tell you what I understand. I understand that you've had 10 years to figure out loyalty, honesty, and respect. You failed at all three. And now you're scared. His mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, he spoke softer this time. Emily, please. I can fix this. I'll fix it. I took a slow breath, keeping my tone gentle but firm. Ryan, some things can't be fixed with apologies. Some things can't be fixed at all. You have to live with what you've done. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights reflect on the wet streets below. I thought about everything. The betrayal, the injustice, the sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. And in that stillness, I realized something important. Kindness doesn't always mean saying yes to someone's demands. Sometimes, kindness means standing firm, even when your heart wants to waver. The next morning, I returned to my office, ready to focus on work and the upcoming court proceedings. But when I checked my phone, I found dozens of messages from Ryan. Calls, texts, even emails from his new lawyer, all trying to intimidate me. I ignored them. Instead, I focused on preparing the evidence, and Tiffany helped. She had collected everything he'd ever said or done. Photos, receipts, messages, even recorded voice notes where he admitted to lying, cheating, and using both of us for his own gain. We spent hours going through each piece, organizing it into a clear, undeniable record. I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, I realized I had control again, not over Ryan, but over myself. Then came the unexpected twist. One evening, while sorting through documents, Tiffany froze and whispered, "Emily, look at this." I leaned over and saw an email dated 3 months ago. The subject line read, "Emergency plan if Emily finds out." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, Ryan had detailed a plan to cover all of his tracks, forging documents, lying to banks, misleading clients. But the last line made my heart stop. If she starts discovering things too fast, I'll make it look like she's unstable. Everyone will believe her before she can expose me. I looked up at Tiffany. He planned this. Everything. He knew I was smart enough to figure it out. Tiffany swallowed hard. He's dangerous. I nodded. Maybe. But dangerous doesn't mean untouchable. That night, sleep came reluctantly. My mind kept returning to the memory of his face outside my door. The desperation, the fear, the arrogance that thought he could intimidate me. By the next morning, I realized that Ryan's biggest mistake wasn't cheating, lying, or stealing. His biggest mistake was underestimating me. I spent the day preparing for court and drafting statements. But by late afternoon, an unexpected knock came, not at my door this time, but at the building's front entrance. I glanced through the security camera. My stomach froze. It was Ryan. And he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a man I didn't recognize, tall, muscular, wearing a black leather jacket, eyes hidden under sunglasses even though it was overcast. He had a folder clutched tightly under his arm. Ryan waved, trying to look casual. But there was something different about him now, something calculated. I pressed the intercom. "Can I help you? Emily Carter?" Ryan's voice sounded rehearsed. "We need to talk. It's urgent." I stepped back and whispered to Tiffany, who was watching nervously. "Stay calm. Don't answer." The man in black shifted slightly, stepping closer to Ryan. Something about him made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then Ryan did something I didn't expect. He smiled at me, but it wasn't a smug, cocky smile I knew. It was forced, desperate, almost pleading. "Emily," he said softly, "you don't know the half of it." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Because that sentence, those words, meant that whatever I thought I knew about Ryan was only the beginning. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. I stood frozen behind the glass of the intercom, my heart hammering against my ribs as I watched Ryan and the tall man in black stand under the gray sky, folders in hand, acting like they owned the world. The rain had stopped, but the chill in the air felt like it had seeped into my bones. I whispered to Tiffany, who was crouched behind the sofa, "Call Caroline."
Now.
Tiffany fumbled with her phone, hands shaking. I can't get through. He must have called the office too. Everything's busy." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. Panic would only make them bolder. I had spent too long preparing, gathering evidence, and building my case to let fear ruin it now. I pressed my back against the wall and whispered again, "Stay calm. We wait, we watch. He'll make a move, and when he does, we'll be ready." Ryan's smirk had returned as he patted the man in black on the shoulder.
"See, Em?
"We're not here to fight.
We just want to talk."
Please, for old time's sake." I narrowed my eyes. "Talk. Or threaten." I whispered, barely audible. "Because your kind of talk usually comes with a price, Ryan." He tilted his head, pretending innocence. "It's complicated." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed quiet, my mind racing. "Complicated? You call this complicated? You've destroyed everything, and now you're standing there like a victim?" The man in black shifted his weight, and I noticed his jacket sleeve had a logo, an emblem of a private investigation firm. That explained the folder. They were professionals. "Emily," Ryan said, his voice lowering, almost pleading now, "just hear us out. We can fix this. We can negotiate." I stared at him, my expression unreadable. Negotiate what? My life? My peace of mind? The tall man opened the folder and slid some papers across the ground toward the building entrance, far enough for me to see from behind the glass. Contracts, letters, even receipts, all pointing to Ryan's lies and manipulation. But alongside them, there were documents I hadn't seen before, documents about debts he hadn't mentioned, pending lawsuits, and something called a non-disclosure agreement that referenced both of us. I felt a pit in my stomach. Whatever Ryan had planned, it was bigger than I realized. I pressed the intercom button, keeping my voice calm but firm. Ryan, I don't care about negotiations. If you step foot inside this building, I will call the police. You've crossed enough lines already. He smiled nervously, then nodded toward the man in black. The tall man stepped back, closing the folder. They turned, walking down the street slowly, not daring to look back. I exhaled slowly, my body trembling slightly. My hands felt clammy, my heart racing, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Emily, Tiffany said softly, standing beside me. What was that? What do we do now? I shook my head, trying to gather my thoughts. We wait. We prepare. That wasn't over. Whatever he's planning, it's only beginning. But we're ready. We have everything we need to stop him. For the next week, I stayed vigilant. I met with Caroline daily, reviewing documents, organizing evidence, and preparing for court. Every call from Ryan or his lawyer was ignored, every attempt to intimidate us recorded and stored. Tiffany stayed by my side, learning how to protect herself from the manipulations of someone like Ryan. She asked questions, practiced statements, and I realized how much she had grown. From a scared, naive girl to a young woman learning to stand firm against lies. Then one evening, I got a call from Caroline. Her voice was tense but professional. Emily, there's been a development. Ryan just filed an injunction against you, claiming harassment and defamation. I felt a cold wave of panic, but I kept my voice calm. What does that mean? It means he's trying to turn the court against you before we can even present your evidence. We need to act fast. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me.
Do it.
Whatever it takes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the apartment, Tiffany watching silently from the couch. I thought about everything Ryan had done. The betrayal, the lies, the audacity to show up at my door, and I felt something powerful. Clarity. I wasn't going to be intimidated. I wasn't going to be scared. I was going to win. Not just for me, but for anyone who had ever been treated like their voice didn't matter. The next morning, Caroline and I arrived at the courthouse early. The building was busy, full of people shuffling paperwork and attorneys speaking in hushed tones. But I felt calm, ready. Then, just as we were entering the courtroom, I caught sight of Ryan through the crowd. He wasn't alone. Tiffany had been right. He had hired help. But this time, it wasn't private investigators. It was more people who looked like they were ready to argue, intimidate, even threaten. And I realized that whatever happened in that courtroom today would change everything. Because Ryan had underestimated me once. But he was about to find out just how far a woman can go when she's calm, prepared, and refuses to let fear control her. The judge called the session to order, and Ryan's lawyer stood, ready to speak. But before a word left his mouth, I handed the first set of evidence to the court clerk. Every forged signature, every document, every lie neatly organized and presented. The room went silent. And that's when Ryan realized the game was no longer in his hands. The courtroom was tense. Every eye seemed to be on Ryan, whose face had turned pale. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by unease, a twitch in his jaw, a hesitation in his step. He tried to speak, to argue, but the evidence I had submitted was airtight. Every forged signature, every falsified receipt, every attempt at deception, laid out clearly for everyone to see. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, looked over the files. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice calm but firm, "these documents are serious. How do you respond?" Ryan opened his mouth, and for a moment I thought he might actually apologize. But instead he stammered, "Your Honor, It's complicated.
I
I didn't mean. Complicated is not an excuse for forgery, the judge interrupted. You've been accused of fraud, deception, and misuse of marital assets. You'll have the opportunity to respond with factual evidence, but until then, no transactions from the accounts in question may proceed. Ryan's eyes darted around the room, landing on Tiffany, who was sitting quietly beside me. She gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, and I felt a surge of pride for her. She had been brave enough to come forward, brave enough to face him, and her courage helped me stand taller. I remained seated, calm, as Ryan's lawyer tried to interject, attempting to spin lies and excuses, but every claim was dismantled by the clear evidence in front of the court. At that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every woman who had ever been belittled, every person who had ever been manipulated into silence, every person who had been told their voice didn't matter. And I would not lose. After hours of testimony, the judge called a recess. Ryan stormed out of the courtroom, his face twisted in frustration. I could hear his voice echoing in the hallway as he yelled at his lawyer. You didn't warn me. She's got everything. Everything. I stayed seated, taking deep breaths. My heart was racing, but my mind was clear. This wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I felt in control. When I returned home later that evening, Tiffany was waiting for me, holding a folder of her own. Emily, I found something else. Emails, messages. He's been covering up other accounts, transferring money to shell companies. We can prove it now. I took the folder, my hand steady. Good work. This will finalize everything. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about kindness, about empathy, about how, even in the midst of betrayal, we can choose how we respond. Ryan had tried to destroy me, but instead, he had shown me the power of resilience, patience, and careful planning. I knew that tomorrow would bring the final confrontation. Ryan would realize that no amount of smarts, threats, or arrogance could outmatch someone who refused to be afraid. And when that moment came, I would not just win. I would rise above every lie, every betrayal, every attempt to intimidate me. Because I had learned the most important lesson of all. Strength isn't loud, and revenge isn't always about anger. Sometimes, it's about patience, precision, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing justice unfold exactly as it should. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse once again. This time, Ryan looked completely different, defeated, nervous, and no longer cocky. He tried to avoid my gaze, but I didn't look away. I knew that the moment the judge read the final documents, everything would change. The clerk called the courtroom to order, and the judge began to review the additional evidence. Every forged document, every manipulated account, every deception was presented meticulously. I watched as Ryan's face drained of color. He tried to speak again, but the judge cut him off. This is a matter of serious legal and ethical violation, the judge said. Given the comprehensive evidence provided by Ms. Carter and corroborated by witness statements, the court finds in favor of Ms. Carter regarding the protection of assets and the annulment of fraudulent claims. All accounts misused by Mr. Carter will be returned to their rightful owner. Further, Mr. Carter is to refrain from any contact with Ms. Carter or her associates. Ryan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked at Tiffany, looked at me, and then finally, he slumped into his chair, defeated. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe freely. I had fought with patience, intelligence, and empathy, not rage. And in the end, that had been my greatest strength. As we left the courthouse, Tiffany walked beside me, holding my arm. I can't believe it, she said softly. You did it. You really did it. I smiled. We did it. Not just me, but both of us. And the important part? We did it without letting hate guide us. That's the real victory. Tiffany nodded, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. I'll never forget this lesson. And as we stepped out into the sunlight, I realized something profound. Life will always throw betrayal, lies, and challenges at us. But kindness, patience, and intelligence, Those are the tools that make us truly unstoppable. I knew that from this point forward, my life would be different. I would be free, not just from Ryan, but from fear, anger, and manipulation. But little did I know, the story wasn't fully over. Because sometimes, the people we think we've left behind still have one last move to make. And Ryan? He wasn't finished yet. The sun was bright that morning, but the warmth did little to ease the tension I felt as I stepped into my office. The courthouse had ruled in my favor, freezing Ryan's accounts and nullifying his fraudulent claims, yet something told me this was only part of the battle. Tiffany had arrived early, holding a stack of documents. She was calmer than I had ever seen her, stronger, wiser, more confident. It made me proud. "Emily," she said, handing me a folder. "I double-checked everything. Ryan can't touch your assets, and there's no way for him to challenge the ruling." But she paused, her expression serious. "He's not going to take this quietly." I nodded. "I know. People like Ryan never do. But we've prepared for every scenario. We have the evidence, the witnesses, and the law on our side." For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to enjoy a rare feeling of security. I looked around my apartment, at the small studio I had created for myself, at the calm, organized space that reflected my inner peace. No Ryan, no chaos, no manipulation. Just life, mine to shape. Then my phone buzzed. A message. Simple. From an unknown number. "You think this is over? Think again."
R.
I felt a chill run down my spine. Ryan. Predictable, audacious, relentless Ryan. I showed the message to Tiffany. "What do we do?" I smiled faintly, trying to mask the flicker of anxiety. "We stay calm. We don't respond. We let him reveal himself. He always does." And sure enough, he did. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a knock at the door. My first thought was to ignore it, but instinct made me peek through the peephole. Ryan. Alone this time, soaked from the rain, a desperate look in his eyes, the kind that spoke of panic rather than confidence. He pounded on the door, almost frantic. I took a deep breath. I wasn't afraid, but I wasn't naive either. I called Caroline first, explaining the situation. She instructed me to stay inside, not engage, and document everything. Ryan's pounding grew louder, his voice rising in anger. "Emily.
Please.
I need to talk. This isn't fair." I stayed silent, watched through the glass as he pounded his fists against the door, his frustration spilling over. Every second of this reinforced my belief. Patience, calm, and preparation always trump rage. After what felt like an eternity, his energy faltered. He slumped against the door, breathing heavily, and then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away, muttering threats and frustration under his breath. I exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of relief and triumph. Tiffany came to my side. "He's gone for now," she said quietly. I nodded.
Yes.
But more importantly, we've won. Not just legally, but emotionally. We didn't let fear or anger control us. We stayed strong. We stayed kind when it mattered. That night, I sat by my window, looking at the city lights of Chicago reflecting off Lake Michigan. I thought about the past months, the betrayal, the manipulation, the stress, and realized how much I had grown. I had learned that strength isn't just about fighting back. It's about staying true to yourself, maintaining empathy even for those who've hurt you, and rising above the chaos. In that quiet moment, I made a promise to myself. I would continue my life fully, without fear. I would work hard, love openly, and protect my peace fiercely. Ryan's storm had passed, but the lessons he left me with were permanent. The next morning, I began packing for a short trip. Not for work, not for anyone else, just for me. Tiffany was helping me load the car. "You ready?" she asked, smiling. I nodded. I am. And this time, it's about living, not surviving. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting perhaps to see Ryan trailing us, planning another move. But the street was empty. For the first time in years, I felt freedom, not the fleeting freedom of escape, but the true freedom of control, of self-respect, and of knowing that no one could dictate my life again. I glanced at Tiffany, who caught my eye and smiled. "You did it, Emily. You really did it." I smiled back. We did it. And now the rest of our lives begin. And as the skyline faded in the distance, I knew that no matter what storms life might throw at me next, I was ready. Stronger, wiser, and guided by a simple but powerful truth. Kindness and empathy are never weaknesses. They are the true weapons of strength. Ryan had lost not just the battle, but his power over me. And that knowledge, freedom, clarity, and peace was more valuable than anything he had ever tried to take. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't loud, dramatic, or public. Sometimes they're quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying. And mine was exactly that.